Here's what you get with this episode of The Nice Guys on Business.
The story, what happens is it literally lights up pictures in our minds, and that then ignites oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, and it literally is like washing over our bodies. And so we now have an emotional connection because we can see the people, we can relate to the characters that are in the story. And we at Story Fruition, we really like drill down with our clients so that we know when they're telling a story that it is as crystal clear as it can possibly be. We almost are taking clay and sculpting their story so that it's like a masterpiece when they're done.
I told Bill that if they move my desk one more time, then I'm quitting. I'm going to quit. They moved my desk 4 times already this year. I used to be over by the window, and I could see the squirrels, and they were merry, but then they switched from the swing line to the Boston stapler. But I kept my swing line stapler because it didn't bind up as much, and I kept the staples for the swing line stapler, and it's not okay because if they take my stapler, then I'll set the building on fire, and I might even start listening to the Nice Guys on Business podcast. That'll teach them. Go from where you are now to where you could be. Get expert tips to grow your business, to be more productive and more efficient, whether you're trying to build influence, grow your community, or make it rain. Best-selling author of Nice Guys Finish First, Doug Sandler, can lead the way. The Nice Guys on Business is produced by Turnkey Podcast Productions. Now, here's your host, Doug Sandler.
All right, Nice Guy community. So we all know this because we've talked about this on our show before. Storytelling is an essential business skill. We use stories in a variety of ways to attract our customers, our partners, our investors, and actually even to build our team and the relationships that are within our team. Your audience seems to understand what you do and why you do it, and your powerful storytelling skills must emotionally hook them. A pie chart or a slide deck just can't communicate emotionally the way that stories do. So Melissa Reaves, she's here to share what she does. She's an executive storyteller. She's a mentor. She's an advisor. She helps professionals hone the craft of business storytelling, creating this thing called mind movies that mesmerize. Here to talk about the whys and the how-tos of storytelling. Melissa, I'm excited to have you here. Welcome to the Nice Guys on Business podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. It's great to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I'm happy to have you here. And you came to me by way of another guest that was on our show, Jeremy. And what was cool was, he shared a little bit about your story in the beginning, and Jeremy Richards. So that's just a few weeks ago. Nice Guy community, listen to that. And so what's really cool is when one story matches another, and you do have a pretty compelling story. So how did you even get into the world of storytelling to begin with?
Well, it was a long journey my entire life, I think. So I started acting at 9, and that's really what my passion was. And I learned that, and all actors know this, and I'm actually an improviser, a professional improviser with Jeremy Richards. That's how we know each other. In fact, two more of my coaches, I have 8 now, are all professional improvisers, which is really cool. And we're taught that it's all about the audience. It's all about that. Like, they want to just slip away and forget their tough day, forget their tough marriage, whatever it might be, and just be entertained. And that's what an actor does. Okay. But my whole career, I was in sales and marketing and ad tech and enterprise and data and boardroom meetings and all sorts of things. And we're not that good at thinking about our audience when we're in those sort of situations. And so my question is, why? Why are we not taking the power of what actors can do on stage and bring that over into the boardroom and take the boredom out of the boardroom? So I had gotten fired from a job that I really hated. I just burnt out in ad tech and martech and all that. And I think when you're in a dark place, you start to reflect, what is it I like? What am I about? I mean, I'm really good in sales and marketing. That's true, but I'm so bored with it. It's like soulless. I don't like it anymore, and I was just not feeling who I was. And when you're in your 50s, which is when this happened, you really I think that's a really good time to kind of do a check. Like, what have you done and what haven't you done? And what do you want to do? So I essentially made up my job. I realized I could be teaching these executives how to be more compelling with their presentations by infusing storytelling in. And I had already test driven it because I was pitch coaching, testing out this wild idea that stories in a pitch will be far more compelling than any pie chart or graph. And I was
Mhm.
doing that with Seattle University, and it worked. They were like, wow, this is really fun. This is a really cool way. I'm like, yeah, instead of showing me a graph with the percentage of the people having the problem, let's make up a story about a person having a problem so that we can see it and then we can feel it. And we just kept going with it. And 4 years later, I'm still coaching their business plan competitions, and it's only increasing. So that's how I got into it. I literally followed my gut instinct, pulled all of my positive resources that I bring to the table in business, and created this company called Story Fruition.
I think what's really interesting, I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your path and your journey. I think what's really interesting is there's a recipe to bake a loaf of bread. There's a recipe to break down an engine and rebuild it. And there are certain components in a story that are essential in order for it to land on the right set of ears. Where do you find that some people or successful people go right in putting their story together? What is it that draws the attention of your audience in the components of that story?
Yeah, great question. And like the key question. Yeah, what is it that makes a great storyteller? This is what our workshops are about and what the book is about. And it's about characters who are having relationships, and there are stakes involved, and you can see where they are either in life or where they are physically in the setting of that scene. And some of the best storytellers bring in their own personal moments like I just did,
Mm-hmm.
and they can immediately paint where they are so that we connect. And when we are connecting emotionally, which is where your stories matter, it's not in a chart. Because those that start with a chart, and I see a lot of pitch decks, I see a lot of boardroom decks and things like that, and they're literally inundating the reader, the listener, the audience with so much on one slide.
Yeah.
And the speakers that I see when they're not only telling their great stories, but oftentimes they will have visuals. Their visuals are simple. They're usually just pictures. And why that's important is that when you're giving that verbal presentation, it could be a keynote, it could be an investor pitch, a sales pitch, whatever it might be. When you are verbally presenting your business to someone, and you have a slide that is so simple to watch and it's just supporting the story that you're telling, now you're in control. But if you start off and you're like 70% of all people, blah, 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 and they have a chart with a graph, it is such a massive swing and a miss because we cannot biologically get excited about a pie chart. We can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Snooze
The
fest.
brain just doesn't look at it that way.
As I was doing some research for this interview, one of the things that I ran into on your website was the story that you tell as Missy when you were in college and in that bar and met this guy, and I feel like I was drawn towards the message and the point and what you share in that, and you don't even feel like when you're being told a good story, you don't feel like you're an observer. You feel like you're in the story, and
Bingo.
I love it when somebody can present to me, whether it's through a sales conversation that somebody's having to put me in their services, or somebody that just wants to prove a point and they're sharing a story, whether they bring me in the story or I'm a listener to the story or a viewer of the story that they're telling. I love it. What do you think it is? What is that emotional connection that we as human beings get from a story that we just don't get from numbers or charts?
Well, another great question. It starts actually with the brain. And so when we're looking at a chart, it's an analytical mode that our brain goes into. It's actually coming out of the neocortex. It's looking at it and it is not doing anything emotional. Okay. But human beings operate from emotions, right? We look at things analytically. We want to make sure we're making logical decisions. But the story, what happens is it literally lights up pictures in our minds,
Mm-hmm.
and that then ignites oxytocin, dopamine, endorphins, and it literally is like washing over our bodies. And so we now have an emotional connection because we can see the people, we can relate to the characters that are in the story. And we at Story Fruition, we really like drill down with our clients so that we know when they're telling a story that it is as crystal clear as it can possibly be. We almost are taking clay and sculpting their story so that it's like a masterpiece when they're done. And that's why it's so important. And here's the thing. I don't know about you, but I didn't have any storytelling classes in school. We were taught to read stories, analyze stories, critique them, obviously, write them even. But how do you tell a story? And it's interesting because we have a lot of authors that actually come to us because they're going to go on to podcasts and people are like, tell me that story. In fact, I was just working with Jeremy yesterday on one of his own stories. And he started realizing that the written story can be very, very different from when you're verbally telling it. We were able to add scenes, more dialogue. You can use your voice. You can use your pacing, your pausing. There's all sorts of stuff that we can use with our voice that we can't with pen. And the audience who's reading it, they're really in control when they're reading it, right? And you don't know what their inner voice sounds like. But when you're telling the story and you've polished this, you have way more assets to use as a human being to connect to the other human beings.
I remember early on when I changed careers from being literally a bar mitzvah MC for 30 years and made the transition out of that in 2014, 2015 to my new career as a podcaster and then a podcast producer. I remember early on as I was building my professional speaking platform, I would do these keynotes talking about this one fateful event in 1992 where literally the entire event went down in flames. And it was such a great story to share. And I relate to the fact that I feel like your stories, while there are components of your stories that of course you need to be truthful and you want to share, or unless it's obviously fiction, you're coming across as it's a fictitious story that I'm about to tell you. But at the same time, the fluidity of your story, I think, is just as important as the important subjects that you don't want to leave out, or the important links that will bring it back to your audience that's going to be listening to you. How important is it to you in what you share with your clients to explain or to emphasize the fluid part of your story is, hey, you do have a certain story, but you also have to read your audience to be able to know what you can embellish or the things that you should never embellish. How do you explain that to a client?
That's a good one. Well, here's the thing. There's a process. So we start with story mining, where we're giving prompts for the clients and we're asking them, tell us the time when you were the hero, or tell us the time when you were the zero. What happened? Who were you with? And what did you learn? Then once we get that kind of core story out of them, then we move into story crafting. And that's when we are digging in to find out who are the characters. Can we see them? Do we understand the storyteller's relationship? Is it tense? Is it friendly at the beginning? And then it changes to the opposite, like what happens? And many, many people, when they first start telling a story, they put in so many details that don't matter. So in story crafting, we're like, we call it weed whacking. We're like, we just want to see your garden and we're going to whack the weeds out, which means some of your scenes that you might think are really awesome are really just, maybe they're their own story. Just don't worry that you did it, but like, we don't need it. We got to keep these stories kind of succinct. So that's the crafting part, where you have to kind of allow yourself to know when to advance the story to the next scene, because we literally write them like movies. Like we have storyboards that will stop the meandering. So once we found the story and we show the client how you can do this like a movie, where your characters are going to talk. They're not going to just be like, my boss told me that I was in trouble. Our version would be like, my boss called me and said, you are so much in trouble. I can't believe you did that. And we will literally have the characters talking. The clients are like, oh my God, that's so outside of my zone, but I love it.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then so when they get the storyboards, that's like the second or third version of the story. So they do the kind of the zygote version where it's freshly brought up. Then we start to craft it and then we storyboard it. And now we pretty much got a pretty good core story that they can come back to and use in a variety of ways. But yes, it takes some work. I got to say, I'm pretty confident that most of the clients that come in, they're kind of excited that they have, because they're very booked. Their calendars are full. But when they see a Story Fruition meeting, they're like, yay, I get to tell stories.
Well, it does take a different spin on the boring business meeting, where you actually have a chance to share a story, or not a presentation anymore. It's now you're sharing your story. How many stories does somebody need to have in order to feel like they have a complete briefcase full of stories that they can share? Any idea?
Oh God, as many as they can get. because like I'm on a podcast right now. You could ask me a question. I have a very fat story library. Okay. I can pull out a lot of stories, and you're never going to tell the same story twice. You're going to tell it a little bit differently. To your earlier question, like, how do you know when you should say this to this group? That's a good thing to know, is that you should know who your audience is. If you're with a bunch of women, you might not want to play the scene of you in a sports bar for too long, right? Like we
Right.
might, you know what I mean? So that's just using your instincts. But what was the rest of that question? Because I'm sorry, I kind of
Oh,
went
I
off on
just,
that part.
just that's okay. Totally fine.
Mhm.
My question really was how many stories does somebody need to have in their
Oh,
briefcase
yeah.
in order to feel like they have a complete repertoire? You have your sales story and you have but
Yeah,
and then does it feel real when you have, okay, I'm pulling out story number 3A, and it's like, I know you don't share with your audience that, but there's a lot of pressure in knowing stories too, and the pressure is you got to remember them and you got to pull them out,
that's
and you
right.
have to, that's why it's probably better to tell, I'm assuming it's better to tell a story that's reality of what actually happened, because it's easier to remember facts than the story.
Oh, totally. But you can edit people out if they don't really serve the story. Ask my sister. I've edited her out so many times in story.
I only edited my sister out after she saw me do a keynote, and I talked about her by name and by position of being my sister, about the story when she went to a valet car, and she said to the guy, the valet, do you take cars? And he said yes. And literally, the valet got in, put his bike in the trunk, and drove off, never to be seen again. He actually wasn't valet. He asked the legitimate question. He answered the legitimate question, which was, do you take cars? And he said yes. He was a thief and he stole her car. When I tell that story, when I told that as a part of my keynote, people would say, did that really happen to your sister? I'm like, it really did. And when my sister heard it, she said, I don't want my name used in that story again. She was embarrassed by the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, yes, I could see why she was embarrassed, but you know what? This is life. That's the thing. And, life is gritty, and we've all had embarrassing mistakes. I've told a story where I ended up being conned by a psychic. And it's a funny story, and I've told it on NPR. And, in the end, I persevere, but it was really hard for me to tell that story. I was so embarrassed. Now I tell it all the time.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tell it all the time because it's teaching because that's gullibility, right? When you're gullible, it's embarrassing. But how can you learn to not be gullible without having first been gullible?
Let's talk to somebody in my audience that has not ever put together a story. They're basically presenters, and they don't feel like they have a need for telling stories because they have a job that in their mind, they don't feel like stories are required as a part of their responsibilities. Let's tell them why they're not right, why storytelling is still important, even if you don't have a sales job or a presentation type of job. And I also want to share the things that are important initial things to realize when you start to build your story. So let's just talk to the person first about why, no matter what their position, storytelling is important.
When you are okay, person.
you can
When
you,
you
you
are
can and you can name that person. You can name him.
Yeah.
Let's call him Jared.
Okay, Jared. Jared's a good name. Hi, Jared. I really like your pink polo shirt. I think the collar up is bringing back the 80s, and I think you're really cool. Um,
Nice, Jared. I know Jared, and I think that he might wear pink. He might wear it well.
yes, yes. And what kind of mousse is that in your hair? Um,
It's Vidal Sassoon.
You've worked really hard on this presentation in front of the boardroom, and I'm noticing that it's all charts and graphs. Um, what are you going to talk about that's going to make us feel what you want us to know and do? Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you about this client that we did really well with. Oh, really? Are you? That will be helpful. That's a story. Uh, yeah, it is. I'm like, are you ready to tell that story so that the audience goes, wow, you were a hero? Or are you going to tell that story through the graph and just show them literally, this is what they were billing in year one, and this is what they're billing in year two. Look at how great we are. Is that compelling? Or do we want to hear, what did you do with that client? I just had this talk with someone, this woman who hunts big sales, and she's amazing, Kara Jane Moore. And today she was telling me that she was being challenged by this client, this male audience that she tends to have to walk into, and she teaches organizations how to hunt big sales, and she has it down to a science. And someone said, "Are you sure you're qualified to do this?" And she looked at him, And she's thinking, this entire organization was written by me and my brother. I know it inside and out. And then she smiles and says, yes, I do believe I can help you.
Mm.
And then she gets to work, ends up like blowing them out of the water on what she starts doing with their processes and their marketing and their job descriptions and everything. And they went from $200,000 a year in new sales to 2 million in new sales within 12 months.
Wow.
And now she's like 18 months into that. Now that is a success story,
I would say
right?
so.
Right. And so when I told that story, and I just did that on the fly, and I just found that story literally an hour ago with her, could you see her in some ways?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And how did you see her?
I mean, for me, it might be a different interpretation of somebody that's out there, but I see her now as someone that is has a lot more confidence than before she got started with putting this together. Somebody that's able to take a program and utilize or take a tool and utilize the tool and 10x or more. I would say there's a lot more confidence in her than at the very beginning.
And then when she's with the guy, so the subtle things that are happening then with you listening to that small story is that I created his character. So I did this where he stopped and looked at her and said, are you sure you can do this? And then there was a pause. And then she thought, he has no idea that I wrote this program. That's inside voice. That's inside thoughts of a storyteller.
Right,
and that's really fun. So these are the things that these are the tips and tricks that we teach people. Is that they become conscientious of what they're doing, that they're making their characters be seen and heard and felt. And then I started to list things that she did, because if I could have just said, we went from 200K to 2 million. Well, the natural question will be, how did you do that? So as a storyteller, you've got to, I gave some quick examples. Yep. She changed the jobs description. She reanalyzed the way their marketing and their funnels were going. And I showed things. So every time I did that, you saw a job description in your mind. She changed the funnels. Anyone who knows anything about digital marketing, if this was like a digital marketing group, then they would understand what I'm saying. And I'm giving them just enough of the breadcrumbs to know where this story is going, right? And then you are right. Like in the reflection part, which I did not do, but you actually did it for us, was that when she walked away at looking at that billing at now $2 million in new business, she thought, I did that. And someone doubted me, but I wasn't going to doubt myself. And that was the day that I learned that, yeah, I know my stuff.
It's interesting. I always get caught up in my girlfriend says to me all the time, what did he say? Or what did she say? I said, I don't remember what she said or what he said. I just remember the way it made me feel. So it's like, I'm always connected to the emotion, and maybe she's a little bit more caught in the details. Not that there's any wrong or right. It's just how we interpret the data that we are given. The story is what helps set the emotion up for me. And that's why I love them so much.
Yeah. But like, if you were going to tell a story, so we often have clients that are more like, many of our clients actually, have never stepped on a stage. Like they're CFOs, they're scientists, they're inventors, and they have a very STEM analytical education. And so sometimes they just will default to the data all the time. And we come in and I'm super, like, it used to be right brain, but now it's limbic system brain. And because I've been an actor, so I see things and I feel things faster than I see and feel when I'm looking at data. So it's like a nice marriage between us, because they need to have the data, but we show them, you guys, it's not the pie chart that we want to look at. We want you to look at the data and find the story that the data is telling you. That's what you want to tell, because that's what's going to be more interesting, captivating, and memorable. That's what's going to set you apart. So we infuse stories literally through everything. Like in the boardroom, I have a CFO, she knows her numbers. You could point to any dip in any chart and she'll tell you exactly what happened. But the first time I asked her what happened, I'm like, what happened here? She goes, oh, we didn't recognize revenue. I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, well, we had this client that they technically weren't as nimble as we thought they were going to be, but we went in there and we ended up doing these forensics. And now our relationship, although we didn't recognize the revenue in July, we are expecting even more now in January. It was just, an assumption that we had that we were failing. And I'm like, there you go. There's your story. That's a success story.
Yeah.
And so now when she's in her presentations, we had pictures of water. We had because it's a startup, she had to report when it was choppy waters and when it was smooth waters, and that we had a metaphor of like, everyone's in the same boat. We're all in this boat together. So when she said that, she had a canoe on the cover of her presentation, and she's in the boardroom. And I said, when you say that, every single person in that room will imagine themselves in that canoe together. And she had it on smooth waters. And then when she did all the numbers and she told the numbers and we controlled how much of that data was going to go up on the page at once, it wasn't. We were going to make it in bite-sized pieces. She tells it, and she's just got success story after success story. And at the end, she changed the canoe to this giant ship. And she goes, clearly, we need a bigger boat. And the chairman of the board said, that was the most interesting unpacking of a P&L I have ever seen. And she ended up getting promoted.
That's awesome. That's a great story in itself.
Yeah, I'm proud of her. She was really a great student. She still is.
For those in our community, in our Nice Guy community, if you want to get a copy of Melissa's book, it's called The Storyteller's Mind Movie, Become an Emotionally Connected Leader Through Your Storytelling Skills. It came out in March of this year. Tons of really great reviews. She's basically a 5-star reviewed book, so make sure you get that. It'll help you transform your verbal presentation skills and your slides into those that support you and don't usurp you with too much information. You want to find the pertinent stories for your keynotes, your town halls, your sales, your investor presentations, whatever it is that you want to communicate. Stories are the way to do it. Craft your stories to stop the meander. And that's one of the things that I know I kind of drift off sometimes when I don't stay in the story. If I'm just dealing with facts, I even bore myself when it comes to just sharing that stuff. And it's just stuff. It's just numbers, and people don't remember the numbers. They remember the stories and the emotions. Melissa, one of the things that I had said to you right before I hit record is, and you can help redefine this for me so that you say it in your words. I don't want to screw up the words, which I probably would be doing if you left it just to me. I said to you, what would be successful for you at the tail end of this when this episode airs and it comes out? And here's what I want here's what I want my community to do. What do you want my community to do? They've heard you. I know that they're compelled a little bit more so than they were before they heard the interview to bring storytelling into their life. What do we want them to do with you and your company?
Oh, that would be great. Why don't you reach out and let's have a conversation? So what we can do, we have a lot of different services. So we do investor pitch decks, we do keynote constructions, we do story library building for entire organizations. So if you have some startups that are maybe they're a little bit bigger, they might be in A rounds and they're gathering a lot of stories. We actually create story libraries for companies so that people can learn how to tell the core stories of a company, and the vision stories and the senior leadership stories and all that. So there's a lot of things that we do. So if you go to storyfruitioninfo.com, you will see just a quick landing page. You can tell us a little bit about us, say that you heard us on this wonderful podcast, and we'll have 30-minute conversation together on the house. Let's find out what works, what fits. If you have someone in your organization where you're like, Jared could really use this.
Jared, you could. Your collar is up. You're so 1980s, Jared. It's time to step back.
Jared, yes. So if you have a Jared, or you think you are the Jared, or if you're looking at your own, I'll challenge everyone. Look at your presentations right now. Do you love them, or do you kind of feel uncomfortable because they're really crowded? And you want a review on that? Because we can go in there and we can help you learn how to better define the way your slides are going to go, and you as you're the storyteller, which is also the presenter. Same word to me. So yeah, that would be the best way. storyfruitioninfo.com.
All right. Excellent. Well, we'll make sure we put a link in the show notes. Melissa, thanks for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your motivation behind what you do and why you do it. And thanks for being here on the show today. And thank you, Jeremy Richards, for putting us together. Thanks, Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy. And get his book too. Yeah. And get our books. We're on Amazon.
Excellent. I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes to Melissa's book. Thanks again, Melissa.
Thank you.
Nice Guy community, never underestimate the power of nice or the power of a really good, well-told story. Special thanks to Melissa Reaves. All of her information, including access to her programs and her book, will be right there in the show notes. Steve O'Brien, go ahead and take us out of here.
For the Nice Guys on Business, I'm Steve O'Brien. Fill up your week with the nice guys. Haven't they run out of people willing to talk to them yet?